Who are you?
Right now, I'm this person, which is like a collection of ideas and thoughts and experiences combined with physical matter in the location of Bronx, New York. The past doesn't really exist because if you're thinking about the past, you're doing that in the present. You were never in a past moment. You were only in a present moment. If you're just a content consumer, you should definitely take a break. If you're a content creator, you should also do it because your relationship with it is this yin-yang double-sided thing where it's like, I'm going on here because it's part of my business and I'm supposed to create content, but also while you're on there, you're also consuming. So it's good to detox. Just having the phone is like having a nuclear device in your hand. It actually probably is radiating. So it's like having a nuclear device in your hand that's slowly ticking away a sliver of your cognitive resources. Success has to be an internal feeling.
What's one of the biggest myths about entrepreneurship?
Entrepreneurship is not a moral position. You're not better because you're an entrepreneur.
The enlightenment trap, in a sense, not the book, but that idea of like, once you have this experience of enlightenment or deep presence, this attachment forms. You're like, oh, I want to like experience that all the time. But as soon as you create that attachment and that desire, you are no longer experiencing that. It's like, or you have a desire to experience desirelessness.
I have a text message list, an SMS list of about 15,000 names from the past 10 years. Every day for 3 hours in the morning, I'm knocking off as many of these 15,000 names as I can, just texting them and saying, hey, I just opened up a publishing company. Do you know anyone who wants to publish a book?
What's one question that you would have for the audience?
Why do you want it? Whatever it is that you want so badly, and we all have things that we wake up in the middle of the night or we wake up the first thing in the morning thinking about, examine why you want that.
Welcome to today's episode of Getting to Know You. I'm your host, Cameron Edward Benton, and on today's episode, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Daniel DiPiazza. Daniel is an entrepreneur. He's been online since 2007. He's a 3-time author and now has his own publishing company, New Wave Press. In this episode, we get into a lot of cool topics. We start off right away diving into a lot of philosophy because he often refers to himself as a rich man's Alan Watts. And if you know anything about me, I'm a big fan of Alan Watts. And so we get to really dive into who he refers to as Papa Watts, his philosophical daddy. And this is a really cool conversation. We start diving right off the bat into, what is experience? What does it mean to be alive? If you've been following the show for a while, I start off the episode with the question, who are you? And that's actually a really deep philosophical and spiritual question that we get into right off the bat, even why I asked that question. We follow Daniel's journey from being an online entrepreneur since 2007 and how that journey has ebbed and flowed to create this specific niche experience and skill set that he's able to deliver with New Wave Press. We talk about his favorite travels. We talk about his journey, his advice for business owners at 20 or 30 years old and how that changes throughout our life, and the biggest myth about entrepreneurship. But I think biggest of all, we talk a lot about perspective and we talk about experience and how our perspective creates the world that we live in. Daniel is a really deep and philosophical person who asks the deeper question underneath. And I think you'll really love the question that he has for you at the end of this episode. So make sure you stay tuned. Without further ado, here is getting to know Daniel DiPiazza. Who are you?
Who am I? I was listening. I don't even know who I was listening to. I think it was Jim Carrey quoting Eckhart Tolle, but the whole idea of who, rather than being a person, being a location. So right now, I'm this person, which is like a collection of ideas and thoughts and experiences combined with physical matter in the location of Bronx, New York.
So if you're looking at that, who are you currently based on all those experiences, those things, the factor, the location, all of that?
Professionally, I'm an entrepreneur, which is the broadest thing anyone can say. It's like when it's like when they're saying you're applying for like a house or something. They say, what's your job? Self-employed, But yeah, professionally, I'm an entrepreneur with different experiences. Personally, married man, 36 now, world traveler, lover of all things martial arts, reader, crappy philosopher. These are all just things that were. If I asked you who I am, you might say something different. This is just what I am saying about myself.
Yeah, it's perfect.
What does it mean?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's why I like to honestly ask that question. I was asked that question while I was on a psychedelic trip from somebody, and through that entire experience, it was with a friend of mine who's like a Zen master, and he kind of kept digging at me, and he's like, "No, who are you?" And then I got to a point where I was just like, "I don't know." And he was like, "That's a great place to be."
Yeah.
And yeah, I love your answer, so it's perfect.
Yeah, it depends on how deep you want to go. Like if you want to really have that conversation, we're
Mm-hmm.
nobody and we're all the same thing. We're all one.
Mm-hmm.
We're all individual perspectives of a universal consciousness. But it's just like this is the first question of the interview. So you know, how
Yeah.
do you want to warm up some foreplay to get some lube going first? You
No, no, no.
know?
I don't. I like to start off with the challenging ones.
Okay.
It's interesting because you're the first person to have had that bend so far, which I find fascinating, which doesn't really surprise me. At the same time, just kind of like knowing your content and knowing your relationship with Alan Watts, for example,
Yeah.
and like the work that you've done, right? You've written a philosophy book that at least you explained it as like the poor or rich man's Alan Watts, depending on how
Yeah.
you go about it. So yeah, no, I think it's a lovely, lovely response. I am curious, like one of the things you mentioned is like, you're kind of this collection of experiences, and this is a kind of a deeper philosophical question as well, but like, what or how do you define experience?
These are good questions. Well, one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'm working with my friend Dr. Brett Jones. He's writing a book, and we're helping to publish his book. And so I've been thinking a lot about um, past, present, future, and the idea that the past doesn't really exist because if you're thinking about the past, you're doing that in the present. You were never in a past moment. You were only in a present moment. Past can only
Mm-hmm.
be looking backwards, and then future is a constantly moving bar, a line that you'll never approach. And as soon as you think about the future, you're in the present, and you'll never get to the future because it's always the present. And so it's always just this one singular moment. And then your experiences are, well, I guess in terms of like your physical sensations, you're experiencing the environment interacting with you. And so it could be a bodily sensation. It could be a thought that floats by. It could be an interaction that you have with someone else. But these are experiences, and through our perspective, we create meaning out of them. So, like,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm if I had an interaction with someone that made me feel a certain way, now I tell myself that I'm sad, so I'm having a sad experience. Doesn't mean it's not sad, but I'm also creating that experience by perceiving something that happened to me in a certain way that then creates an emotional response. The emotional response can create real chemicals in your brain that creates a real physical and bodily response. So you're having a real reaction, but it's based on your perception to stimuli.
Mm-hmm.
So experience is like it's raw data colored. This is my opinion. It's raw data colored by emotional perspective. And then it's something that we can look back on and say, that was insert the emotional verb, or insert the emotional word blank. That was a happy experience. That was a sad experience. That was a thrilling experience. Um, yeah.
Very cool. And when you talk about like perspective, and I think that's something that I value a ton. That's why I actually have this podcast. Is for me, it's like the most valuable thing I think each of us have is our own perspective, because we through those different lenses we kind of get closer and closer to sort of like capital R reality or capital T truth, and have like an understanding of those things, as we kind of filter through different people's lenses and understand other voices. I'm curious, like, what are some of the key things that you've done to kind of shape and hone your own perspective?
uh, Probably too much psychedelics.
Okay,
Probably too much. What's too much?
that's a great question.
What did Watts say? He said, when you get the message, hang up the phone. you know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that perspective is you only form perspective looking backwards on your experiences to interpret the data. A lot of times your perspective changes. So something that seemed painful in the present moment can, with a new perspective or a perspective with more time elapsed, can change. Your feelings around things change. Similarly, things that you might have looked forward to in the future, your perspective on those things change when they actually happen. depending on who you are. You think you want something and you get it and you realize that wasn't the thing. And your perspective of what you thought that would create for you changes. So my perspective is informed by my experiences, that, through learning about myself, through, I think, also purposely doing hard and challenging things, because when you're pushing yourself to leave your comfort zone, you're going to break out of your normal routine, and you start to learn more about yourself. And when you start to collect those experiences, you start to learn more about who you are as a person.
Yeah. What is like one perspective that you've had shift in a significant way over time, and what led to that perspective shift?
Well, one of the things I've been thinking about recently is, especially with the elections coming up in the US, the balance between truth and authority. So oftentimes as children, we see authority as truth. So our parents or teachers, or, as we get older, police officers and public officials, and that's authority. And because they're authority, they hold on to the truth, and whatever they say is true. And as I've gotten older, I've seen that it's not authority that's truth. It's truth that is authority. Now, in a practical sense, that doesn't always connect, because we still live in a very, there's a society, we live in a society, and there are, rules to follow. But I think it's grounding in a way to be able to step back from all of the messages we're getting, whether they're political messages or social messages, or just all these different types of things people want us to feel through advertisements and marketing. Yeah, even advertisements and marketing are a form of authority. This is the best cleaner for your sink. This is the best, the best coaching program, the best whatever. We see those as authority. But if you can step back and think about, well, what's true for me? What have my experiences been? Because a lot of times internally, the experiences that we have with people and situations, they don't actually match up with what we're being told, but we value the opinions of others, outside sources, other authorities more than our own inner authority. And it makes us feel lost our whole life, because we feel one thing, but then we get scared to fully lean into that. So we're doing something else because we think that we can't be correct because someone else who knows more than us is telling us what to do. Yeah. And I better just do what they say because it's probably safer to do that, or more profitable to do that, or better to do that. And then we go our whole lives feeling kind of out of alignment. And if you could kind of disconnect from that, I'm kind of joking, but that is something psychedelics can help you with. Meditation can do the same thing. But just like disconnect from that and figure out, well, what's true for me? Then you start to find inner authority. And as you start to listen more to that voice, you'll start to see changes in your life that will be for the positive. Some of them might be painful, but they are positive. And you'll start to have a more balanced and peaceful internal dialogue in life, because you're following what's true for you and not what's true for others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's beautifully well said. And I think that one of the things that I keep being aware of is with the internet and social media, currently we have such a crazy amount of different inputs that are not our own coming into us at hyperspeed
and
hyperactivity. Yeah.
It's amazing to look at, isn't it? It's amazing to think about how much we take in and what we filter out and what gets in there without us wanting it to get in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We have memes running around our head all the time, memes that other people created, and they live there now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And, along the same lines, I've been really, really thinking about this idea lately of the difference and importance between indirect experience and direct experience. And for me, my own epistemology, I kind of don't want to go through the whole rabbit hole, but my real belief is the only thing I know is what I experience, right? Because I can't really know that you exist, but I can know that I'm having this experience of talking with you.
Oh, I don't exist, buddy. I'll save you the suspense. There's nothing here.
Great. Perfect. That problem is solved for me. And it just makes me realize how much of my own life, but how much of all of our lives right now are these, we kind of experience things as, or we feel like we know things because of this indirect experience, but we're kind of like living in a false reality set by all of these different messages rather than actually like having an experience with somebody, which is like even a lot of the reason I have this podcast is I feel like so often, even a lot of the other podcasts that are out there are often interviewing experts, like talking about data, talking about these extrapolations of things, which none of those are actual like people. Like no one's actually talking to the human being in front of them anymore, like having these conversations that you can only really find out when you actually experience somebody else rather than hear about how that person is.
Well, I think that's also beautifully said. And there's a great concept I was reading in a Carl Jung book recently, and he was talking about how there's an average doesn't really exist. So, like, let's say you have a bag of rocks, and you say the average weight of a rock in here is one pound or whatever. But there might not be any rock in the bag that's actually 1 pound. You're taking the average of all of the rocks and saying, this is what, if we divided, there's 100 rocks and we divided all by total weight, and this is what the average weight is. But there might not be one rock in there that actually fits that is actually the average. So you say the average person makes this much money. The average penis size is this. The average, the average person has this many, kids. Like I'm making stuff up. But averages in data aren't people, as you're saying. And then we take that as fact and we compare ourselves through our lived experiences to the extrapolations of other people. And then we feel like we don't measure up.
Yeah. I mean, that goes back to, you mentioned Carl Jung earlier, but like one of the things that I've taken from him is like the statistics are never the patient, right? Like understanding that like these things can point, can help, direct, can inform, and that the same thing, like map is not the territory, right? It's that same idea. Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, one of the things I noticed like in digging into your history a little bit is you have lived on the internet for quite a long time.
Don't dig.
I haven't dug too deep, I promise.
Okay.
But in that there's been all of these different little like significant changes that you have made and sort of these, it looks like almost like 3-year bursts of entrepreneurship and then like a shift and then a shift and a shift. I wasn't sure if that was something you're clearly aware of, but I was like noticing it in the story
Nice
a little
observation.
bit. Yeah, thanks. And I was curious like what your thoughts are on that and just in general, what is it like having been living so publicly on the internet for so long? Because I think it's been since like 2007, right?
I need to go to therapy. Yeah, I guess it is since 2007. I mean, you also have to consider the context of the internet during that time. When I started writing online, the online looked way different. So your relationship with public exposure of yourself changes as the environment changes. So I wasn't even thinking about it in 2007 as I'm building a personal brand or I'm writing I'm blogging. I'm just like, I like writing and here's somewhere I can write and I don't care if anybody's reading this. And then of course, as you progress in that, your perspective of it is going to change. The way I feel about creating content now is totally different than I would have felt almost 20 years ago in 2007. But the core of it is still just really enjoying putting my thoughts out there, although over time it does get exhausting, which is why I'll see those 3-year bursts and then I'll take a break. Like I was off social media for the past year. I just got back on in August. And it's exhausting. I applaud the people who can just keep going with nonstop. I need breaks, man.
Yeah, well, you took a pretty significant break recently. I think you took a year plus off of the internet, social media.
About a year. August 23 to August 24, I took off.
Yeah. What was that experience like for you? Like if you're starting kind of at the beginning and you close off all the apps, you're no longer on the internet, you're kind of in that first stage. Like walk us through those like first 10 days and then how did that experience evolve?
You ever had crack withdrawal? You ever been in a heroin hole? No, honestly, you'd just be surprised how quickly your brain clears up. It's just think about it like this. It's just one less vector to get other people's thoughts in your brain. It's one less trap door to input more shit. It doesn't mean that I took the apps off my phone, but sometimes I would still check in. I still look at YouTube. Like I'm not completely And then I would go through phases even where I was like, no social media, no Netflix. I would go through various like no streaming. It's just nice to see that you don't need it, man. After 10 days, you'll be fine. You don't need it. If you're just a content consumer, you should definitely take a break. If you're a content creator, you should also do it, because your relationship with it is this yin yang double-sided thing where it's like, I'm going on here because it's part of my business and I'm supposed to create content, but also while you're on there, you're also consuming. So yeah, it's good to take a detox. It's good to detox weed. It's good to take rest from exercise sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's good. You're not missing anything. When I came back, guess what? Instagram looked the same. Nobody gave a shit. The people who started DMing me again, they're like, "Welcome back. You missed absolutely nothing." You know, so you won't miss anything. But then again, there are people who are making more money than me, and they're saying, "We'll never stop posting content." This is, but I don't care. That wasn't my goal.
Yeah. With that, like, how did your perspective on the internet change, like, over the course of that time? Like, when you came back to the internet, when you came back to the apps, you came back to being online again, like, what had shifted for you in that break?
Honestly, I think it was a good perspective shift, or just a broader awareness of how much time we spend on the apps. I mean, if you really, I don't even think the phone, you know how the phone has like a tracker where it picks up, see how many pickups you have, how many app opens you have. I think it's worth it to look at that stuff and to really, if we could really see how much time we spend, the micro moments is what it steals from us. It's like, I don't know if you do this, maybe you do, but like, you ever listen to a YouTube video and you're walking around the house and you're playing the video as you're like doing your laundry, and then you're like bringing it around the house, and it's like, it's this constant sidekick. You go outside, you know, like if I don't have my phone, I feel naked. It's this constant thing. It's not just the social apps. It's the phone itself. So it's like everyone wants to blame social media and, you know, Mark Zuckerberg on zapping our attention away. And do you remember, it was last year or 2 years ago that Instagram was down? Do you remember this? Instagram and Facebook were down.
Like for like a day or two or something?
For a day
like
or
that?
two, something like that. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, man, I think it was 2 years ago. I loved it. It was so nice. It's just because nothing could get through that channel. And you realize how much is coming through that channel when nothing can get through. And, but I don't think that it's actually social media that's the issue. I think it's the phone that's the issue, because the phone has become an externalized brain and we can't do anything without it. We need to use it to think. We need to use it to store our ideas. We need to use it to communicate. And so I think even getting off the apps, although it was helpful, just having the phone is like having a nuclear device in your hand. It actually probably is radiating. So it's like having a nuclear device in your hand that's slowly ticking away like a sliver of your cognitive resources, or a lot, depending on how much you're putting in. So that is something I couldn't get away from directly, because I'm still having people text me. There's still notifications popping up. I would have to go completely away to a Vipassana to see what that's like. And I'm not sure if I would want to live in a world with no I think I'd want to have a smartphone. Even I've considered, like, have you ever thought about going back to a flip phone?
I've thought about it, but I not like extensively, because I do see so much value in the phone that I get, and it's a beautiful device in so many different ways. It's amazing,
you know. Yeah. But I thought about getting the flip phone, and I'm like, okay, what would I be missing out on? I get calls, okay, fine. I guess you can do like the, you know, QWERTY text where it's like AAA, BBB, CCC. If you're Gen Z, you won't know what I'm talking about. You know, do you remember? Oh my gosh,
this? I just picked up. Yeah, I totally just picked that up. Yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 35, so I'm just a little bit younger than you.
Same age. Yeah. So like, for anyone else who's listening, before you could actually push your one finger on one letter to type like you're on the computer, there was only like 12 keys, and each key had 3 letters on it. And if you wanted C, you'd have to type 1 3 times. AAA, BBB, CCC. But then what's so crazy is your brain adapts to that, and you can actually type pretty well like that. So it's like, you know, I actually think that's better in some ways, because it forces you to be concise, you know, because you can't type whole paragraphs and essays with this thing. So it's like Twitter style. It's like 55 characters or whatever. That's it. So yeah, but I think it's the phone in general that's the attention hog. And I wasn't able to get away from that completely, but it was nice not to have the social.
Yeah. One of the insights I heard you talk about I think you did a podcast episode right when you came back from it, was this like difference between who you are as an entrepreneur, or even just a person like in your 20s versus who you are in your 30s.
Sure.
And I was wondering if you could just share a little bit more about that. Like, what were some of the insights or differences in advice maybe that a 20-year-old needs versus a 30-year-old like in the business journey?
In the business journey. Okay, this is a really good question. Well, I can only give you advice based on what I would say to myself.
Sure.
I can't say that there's a generalization that everyone should know or do, but I would say in the 20s, try as much as you can. And in your 30s, don't be afraid to shed some of the identity that you build in order to start a new chapter or climb the second mountain. And when you shed that identity, it's not that you're throwing away the work that you've done. You're actually consolidating the work that you've done, but then using that in the next phase. I think that when it comes to true entrepreneurial progress, the real mark of progress it's obviously not success in everything you do, because that's not reality. That's maybe what you see on Shark Tank or whatever, but that's not real. The true marker of entrepreneurial progress is working on something for a while, failing at it, and then taking the systems or the lessons or the things that you took from that experience, even if it took a few years to fail, giving it your all, failing at it, and then taking that information, going immediately to the next thing and installing whatever that is, the knowledge, the systems, the information, the technology, the people, because these are all things you learn through entrepreneurship, how to find great people, or you take relationships with you, or you build some systems, or you learn some insights about a certain industry, taking those and applying it to the next thing so that you cut down your own learning curve. So you're never really starting over. You're always sharpening from the point that you're already at. You're not starting from zero. You're starting from whatever you learned, wherever you just stopped. And I think that if we understood that younger, it would make it easier, because oftentimes what I see in younger entrepreneurs, even if they're not in their 20s, you can be a young entrepreneur in your 50s if you're just starting. What I see is people trying to get it right the first time, trying to nail it. Like, I want to get the perfect idea, perfect company. I have to make this work. It has to work. It doesn't have to work. It's okay if it doesn't. And that is relevant for me because, when I was writing, and blogging, and things were starting to pick up for me right around the time that the social media was picking up, and I was writing my blog and it turned into a book. I think it would have gone even smoother if I would have been okay with letting go of that a little bit sooner in order to let myself kind of breathe and expand. But I felt like I had to keep doing what I was known for in order to be successful. And that's one way of approaching life, but it only works if you really are enjoying that. If you're not, you have to move on. Or if you're working on a business and it's just not going the way that you want it to go, it's okay to exit stage left, to dump it, and to move on. And so in your 20s, you're not always going to know when the right time is. Kenny Rogers say, know when to hold them, know when to fold them. You're not always going to know because you don't have the experience. And as you get into your 30s, hopefully you failed enough times if you started early enough where you're like, okay, I can recognize this pattern and it's time for me to make this next jump. And that is a useful way of progressing.
Beautiful. How do you define success personally?
Well, in the business context?
However you want to phrase that. Yeah. It can be business, but like within your life, like when you look at somebody who is successful, or for your own definition of that, like what is that for you?
Well, I think success has to be an internal feeling because externally the milestone is always moving. So you can be successful at many different stages of your life, even if you're not hitting a certain metric, a goal that you've set for yourself. You can be successful without always hitting your goals. They're not mutually exclusive. You can still be successful while being ambitious and hungry and wanting to go to the next level. And I think sometimes we count ourselves out. I mean, for me, just from a career perspective, I made a career as an author and a writer, and that's really cool. I didn't think that was even going to be a thing. When I was graduating high school, I was thinking about joining the FBI, I don't know.
Wow, yeah.
But I just didn't think that was a thing. And I think that I give myself credit for that. I have been self-employed for 15 years now. That's successful to me. And then along the way, there are like projects I've done that have been successful and ones I have done that have not been successful. But I think overall, are you satisfied with your life? Yes. Do you have exciting goals that are pushing you to expand yourself? If the answer to that is also yes, then you are successful. The individual successes and failures within projects or within smaller time frames, I don't think is as important as if you feel like we were talking about earlier, you're internally being truthful with yourself about the direction that you're headed. And you're not saying, well, I saw that Tom Bilyeu had $1 billion exit with Quest and I want $1 billion. It's like, if you're measuring it off of that, then you're never going to feel like you're getting there, because Tom Bilyeu is not happy with his results still. He's like, I got to start the next Disney now. I'm like, do you? And so, and I think it's interesting because as an entrepreneur, there's this neuroticism of never enough. And I think part of the reason why I've been successful, but like part of the reason why I am not a multi-millionaire is because internally, I just don't care. Like I care and I have goals and I'm pushing to achieve them, but I think I've just done so much psychedelics that I just see it doesn't really matter. It's like, we're not really here. We don't really exist. We're all going to evaporate anyway. I've already seen God, the God force. I'm not even going to say that I get it, because once you say you get it, that's when you know you do not get it. So I'm not going to say I understand, but I've seen enough to know that all the games that we're playing down here doesn't really matter. So people take life too seriously. There's a difference between being serious and being sincere. I'm very sincere with how I approach life, but I don't think it's that serious. It's a fucking game. You look outside in New York City, how many are these people even real? Are these just NPCs walking around? I'll never know, because I don't know you. I don't see where you go after you close the subway doors. How do I know? And also, you're just a reflection of me. You only exist because I'm looking at you right now. Just like within physics, the fact that I am viewing you changes your state, which sounds very narcissistic. But so when you start to look at things at that level, it's just not that serious anymore. And it's hard to be like, I'm going to do business, And so you got to find that balance of, okay, we're playing the earth game. I know I need to get $25 million because that's going to spit out $700,000 a year after tax, adjusting for inflation. That's a good nest egg to have. And so you're playing these earth games, but it's a game. And it's a lot less stressful if you look at it like that.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think one of the most important things, and this is something that I always got from Tim Ferriss, right, is like defining these nebulous words. Like, because a lot of times otherwise you're just constantly chasing this word that you're using that you actually have never defined for yourself. And I find like so many people, like young entrepreneurs, like everyone in their life can often be like, oh, I'm not successful yet, or that person is successful, but no one is looking at that internal barometer of like, what does that actually mean? So I really appreciate your insight on that.
Yeah. And talk to the most successful people and realize that even they won't even want to say that they're successful, or that they're not quite happy yet. And you're just like, well, what are we doing it for? What are we doing this for, guys? I don't know.
Yeah. What's one of the biggest myths about entrepreneurship?
Entrepreneurship is not a moral position. You're not better because you're an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship has nothing to do with not having a boss, really, because if you're doing your job right, you're just going to have a lot of bosses. It's like
I love that.
It's a joke.
It's so true.
It's a fucking joke. Like it's if you're going out and getting clients, that's your boss. If you have a team, ultimately that's your boss. So this whole idea of not wanting to be responsible to anybody else but yourself, and it being easier. And then also, like, I think probably the culture is changing a bit now, but there was for a while, like, and I probably am responsible for this in my own way, for putting this message out there that like entrepreneurship is morally superior. There's just not, it's not, there's nothing, it doesn't make you a stronger person or a better person. I really think, honestly, if you can find a job that pays you what you love and that you enjoy it, let someone else handle all the day-to-day shit. It's like, why would you, when I was studying acting, like in Florida years ago, my acting coach said to me, she's like, if there's anything else you can do besides acting, do that. Because and it's the same with entrepreneurship. If there's anything else you can do, if you really love your job, why would you want to leave that to do something that you where you have to bear all the weight of that? And every job that someone works at, every business someone works at, there's an entrepreneur who runs or owns that thing who's fretting every month that they're going to be able to make payroll, that it's going to work out, that the thing that happened last year doesn't happen this year. Like, it's always both sides of the coin. Now, it's not necessarily you can talk about job security and your earning potential. And those are things that entrepreneurship can be, there's an argument for it there. It's like, you want to be able to control your job to a certain extent, although entrepreneurship isn't necessarily very secure, but you want to be able to know when you're going to get chopped, versus they laid me off,
Mm-hmm.
and there are benefits to it, but it's not better. It's just different. It's not better at all. It's like red, blue,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think about often a lot is that, almost going back to like, how do you define success, is like, what is it that you're seeking in entrepreneurship? Like,
Yeah.
what is it you're looking for? Because I think that like something that I realized in a previous job that I had is that within that organization, I was very much able to be an organization or an entrepreneur within that organization.
Yes.
But I had all the security, right? And I had the
Yes.
team already built. I had all these things already in place that I didn't have to go and find or hire, or these other learning experiences that aren't necessarily necessary.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you really like what you do, like, let's say if you want to work at Tesla, then that's the only place to do that. You're not going to build a Tesla. So find a place where they're doing what you want to do and just contribute your best to that. I mean,
Yeah.
and then there comes a point too, where if you have a lot of responsibility in your job, it's not much different than working on your own thing, because ultimately time and energy are the same, no matter whether you're putting it into your own thing or another person's thing. So you have to find that balance. And do you have a family? And where do you live? And how much flexibility do you need? And so you have to find the right combination of things. Entrepreneurship, I think, should be a viable option for people to explore earlier in life. And then we should be introduced to it earlier, because within the college and university system, we're still very much programmed to go out and get jobs in a specific way. I even think that within the educational system, we should be focusing on trades as well, not just like the university education, but like trades, HVAC, electricity, plumbing. And honestly, those are things that are probably less likely to get AI and automated out than some of the more cerebral things that are taught in school right now. Things that, GPT has destroyed in 2 years. Whereas guess what? We had to have a plumber come and unclog a massive shit that I made. And that was, I'm like, I don't think it's that bad. He's like, sir, this is a bad clog. I'm like, I tried. He's like, sir, this requires special tools. He's in there.
Oh my
is there
God.
a jackhammer in there? So he's like giving me all these tips afterwards. By the way, guys, when you flush the toilet, a lot of times we just do that one flush and it goes down. Hold the lever all the way to the entire bowl is empty. It'll help the paper go out. Anyway,
Fascinating. Okay.
hold it all the way down. But that was like $300, $400. He shows up there. There's no one else that could do it. A robot can't do it. I can't GPT my way out of it. I don't have the tools. Same thing with electricity. We don't have. Do you know how to? If your electricity went out, are you handy with that? Could you do it? I couldn't. So yeah. And so I think that we should be looking at trades, and I think the entrepreneurship should be introduced earlier as part of our primary education. You can go out on your own. Here are different options.
Yeah.
It's not, but yeah.
Did you go to college yourself?
I went to the University of South Florida in Tampa.
What was your college experience like?
Well, I had an advanced high school, so I only had 3 years on my clock when I got to college. And then of those 3 years, a year and change was spent overseas because I was studying abroad. So I only had 2 years in college. And funny enough, my degree is in communication, which I'm actually using quite well. Never thought I would use it. It's not the reason why I'm succeeding, I don't think, but it's, interesting. My experience was good. I think that I would have, they say all youth is wasted on the young. Like, come on, it's like college was great, and I would have appreciated it more if I'd been present enough to notice that I'm in this moment and that I'm not as smart as I think I am, and that's okay. And it's a limited amount of time. Because even if you just think about when can you try to put yourself in your 19 or 20-year-old brain? Like, it's just a different space to be in. Like, it's like imagine walking into that messy room of a head. Like, I'm speaking for myself. Like, wow.
For sure.
So that experience was, it was pretty typical. Like, I didn't go too crazy, but it was it was a fun experience. It wasn't hard because I'd done most of my hard stuff in high school. I had fun traveling around. I met great people, but I wouldn't say that it was, I wouldn't say like that it was pivotal. I think that without that experience, I would be in a similar path.
I'm curious about that. How so? Because I know that one of the things that you talked about was that studying abroad experience was like
Well,
incredibly impactful for you.
that was,
Yeah.
yeah. I think like the regular educational, like sitting in the classroom thing was just, it was just a required thing. But yeah, I think
Sure.
traveling opens your mind up a lot. And did you know that most Americans don't have a passport still?
Wow.
Yeah, it's like
That's wild.
right over half people don't have, like 60% of people don't have a passport.
Wow.
Which have you done a lot of traveling in the U.S.?
I've done a decent amount. Like, I wouldn't say it depends
How
on
many
where the line
states have
is
you been
again.
to?
Oh God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Probably between 10 and 15 ish, I would
That's pretty
say.
good. That's pretty
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
So Sarah and I took a cross country trip when we moved to New York from Oregon. So like we literally went the furthest distance, and we only would have been longer if we had gone from Seattle. But I mean, we went from
Yeah.
Portland to New York, very long. So I added some more states during that trip. But now I've hit 33 states, which is pretty
Wow.
good. Haven't
Yeah.
hit Alaska, haven't hit Hawaii. You know, there are some that, you know, I don't know when I'm going to get to the Dakotas. I'm not sure. I just don't know.
Hopefully in spring and not in winter.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Now sometimes I drive through these states and I'm like, how did the Native Americans survive? How did you make it? It's freaking cold out here and there's no resources. But so I think the U.S. is just such a it's such a big place that we don't sometimes venture out, and we don't feel the need to travel. You know, at least you know as Americans, that's a general consensus. Although I think younger generations are traveling more,
Mhm.
and I think that travel, especially as early as you can, is going to open your mind up to different cultures, different ideas, going to make you more
Mhm.
flexible, and everyone should do it.
Beautiful. Do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to? Like, if you were going to give one space that you would recommend everyone travel to or have an
These are good
experience in,
questions, Cam. These are good questions.
that's why I have a podcast.
Sarah, what's my favorite place? Okay, first let's answer it by food first. Okay, let's talk food.
Sure. Sure.
So I've been having a pretty spirited debate about this. First of all, I want to know, do you have a favorite? Have you been to other countries before?
I have been, but mostly I have not gone east or west.
Okay,
So I've
so
only gone
only down.
to
Okay,
Canada and Mexico and South
okay,
America. Yeah.
okay. Where in South America?
I've been to Ecuador and I think just Ecuador in South America. I'm
Ooh, I
thinking about
want
it.
to go
Yeah.
to Ecuador. Ecuador's on my
Yeah.
list. I want to go to the Galapagos.
Yeah. That is
That's
definitely there.
biodiversity, baby. So I think my favorite type of food is Mediterranean. We're just talking food. But when we're talking Mediterranean, that could be Italy, Spain, or Greece, or Portugal. And then there's also Egypt, Morocco, Israel. So I've had food from all of that whole area. I think that cradle. I mean, that's kind of where the world was supposedly born in
Mm-hmm.
that cradle of the world. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think the food is best there. It's interesting too when you go over there that they use mostly all the same ingredients, but with different spices, and it comes out a little bit differently. You know,
Yeah.
so I think something like in Egypt and Morocco is a little bit spicier than it's going to be over in, let's say, Israel, or it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be in Greece. Greece isn't very spicy, but it's like olive oil, grilled meats, you know, some sort of like flatbread. The
Mm-hmm.
flatbread in Egypt is different than the flatbread in Italy, but man, it's good bread.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my favorite food spot. And then, like, if I had to drill in really specifically, I think Barcelona was the best food I've had overall.
Wow.
So that's food. In terms of beauty, I haven't been everywhere, but I think there's a place in Italy called the Amalfi Coast, and I think it's the most that I've seen. One of the most dramatic. It's just one of the most dramatic cliffscapes that I've ever seen, and it's pretty gorgeous. So I would highly recommend a Mediterranean trip to anyone who's listening. And the highest number of automatic weapons I've seen in one place was in Egypt.
Wow.
That was fun.
Yeah. What was that like just to be around that?
I would have felt better if I wasn't an American, because
Mm.
I blend in there. But when they find out you're American, there's like a target on your head. When I was
Mm.
when I was we were going on a tour of the pyramids, right? And so the pyramids are in Giza, and so you're like driving from, Cairo and Giza are close. And I remember this is like I was only like 19 or 20, and we're driving, and I remember that it was a tour bus full of American and Canadian and British tourists. So money sign, right? And we're driving, and there are these Jeeps, these red Jeeps that are flanking the tour bus, front, behind, and on the two sides. And they're the open air Jeeps, and there are guys standing out, in the Jeep with, AKs, automatic weapons. And I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting. And and looking back, I realized, oh, that's because these things get abducted on a regular enough basis where they have to protect the tourist with guns just to be able to go visit the pyramids. But the pyramids are cool.
Very cool. What location that you've been to has like shifted your perspective the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, one of the things I'll say is that I think there definitely is a such thing as culture shock. And I think I haven't experienced as much culture shock going north to south. So I've been to like South and Central America, and there's definitely a different culture for sure, but it's still the Americas, right? There's still there's something there. It's like, the Native Americans here, the Aztecs and the Incas down here, you got some European settlers up here, you got some European settlers down there.
Right.
I haven't been to like proper Asia yet. So I haven't been to Japan or China yet. Those are still on my list. Japan, China, Vietnam, Thailand. Like I haven't been over there yet. But I can speak again in just the Middle East or in the Mediterranean area. Morocco, I thought was insane. It just has a different vibe when you drop down. You don't even feel like, you just feel like, well, you're obviously in a different country, but it almost feels like a different planet just because of how different, even the way that the streets are laid out. And so you realize that the environment that you're in and the space that you're in affects your actions and the way that you move. And they don't follow all the same rules, even of traffic flow or of polite social distancing or of, different ways of interacting with people. And even just the number of languages spoken in one place, which I'm sure New York is, comparable, but just the true international, nature of that place. Even I also love seeing English being bumped down the totem pole several pegs. So like in Morocco, it's like Arabic, French, Italian, and then English. And I liked that because put us in our place, And so, and so, yeah, it shifted my perspective. I mean, the first night that we were there, we got basically scammed. We were looking for our riad, which is like a hotel, and they don't do you the courtesy of like, here's the Arabic sign with English translations. It's like, no, it's Arabic. You're in Morocco, figure out the Arabic or don't, where, it's like when you're in Europe or South America, they're like, here's the English translation for all you fucks. No, it's here. So we're looking for our hotel, and we're just like asking around to find this place. And so these kids are like, they're like, oh, you're going to the Riyadh Bindu? Yeah, we'll show you where that is. And so we were close to the location. They're like, okay, but for us to take you there, it's going to be 200 Riyadh or whatever, some amount of money that to them was a lot of money. To me, I was like, it's okay, $5, fine. So we give them some money, and then they literally like within 150 feet, the hotel was right there. So I'm like, you took us 100 feet to get this money, and they're like, here you go. And what was so funny is the whole trip then, I guess they had told their whole network of young preteen friends. And so then they were just following me the entire trip, trying to like get me to do stuff or like take me somewhere. And I'm like, guys, no. You got me once. You fooled me once. Okay. But yeah, the environment's interesting. You feel totally different. And I think everyone should experience it. And even there's a little bit of fear, because you feel like if something happens, I don't even know how to ask for help.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
What are the experiences?
Yeah, no, I love it. I kind of want to pivot over to one of your big influences, which is Alan Watts. Oh, and I was curious about, this is a very broad question, but can you just like share about your relationship with Mr. Watts, or Papa Watts, as you often refer to him?
Papa Watts. What I find interesting is that most people, like, how you'll have, I guess Alan is still he's still kind of niche. But it's interesting that I'm sure you have this as well. We're kind of on the same wavelength. You'll have people that you study and you really think about a lot, and there's some sort of relationship with them. And to other people are like, who's Alan Watts? You're like, what do you mean who's Alan Watts? He's the basis for 22% of my personality. What do you mean? It's such a big influence to one person, to you, can mean nothing to anybody else. Or you've been studying them for years, and it's someone's first time hearing a watch video or reading a book. I'm like, wow, like, and then you realize that things that are niche are kind of that way for a reason. So Alan, I think I can't remember even the first time I read or encountered any of his works, but what I'll say about his work is that, and there's a beautiful book he wrote called The Wisdom of Insecurity, which is probably my favorite book by him.
Yeah, same.
You like that book?
Yeah, it's the one that I've gifted the most to people. That one and Seneca's On the Shortness of Life. Those two are the ones I give most. Yeah,
the Wisdom of Insecurity is it's called like a message for an age of anxiety, which is funny because it's written in 1955 or something.
Yeah,
it's
way
so
before our current time, which is
relevant.
So yes, it's very, very relevant.
It's so like even it's somewhere on my like most read stack somewhere next to me. But like the things that he says, I'm like, you could just copy and paste this to 2024. It's so relevant. And I think what I like about him the most is he's able to make you simultaneously understand that none of this matters and that it's going to be okay. And it's a very calming way of looking at the world because we're living in this constant frenetic pace. There's a lot of anxiety. It doesn't seem like there's an age of anxiety. It seems like humans are anxious, period. And I think he has a beautiful way of bringing bringing a soothing tone to your soul. But at the same time, what I love about Alan is that he other people see him as a guru, but he didn't see himself as a guru. He said I can't practice what I preach because I'm not a preacher. And funny enough, he died from complications of alcoholism. And you look at that, and I think that he would think that's funny. I think that he knew, like, even in The Wisdom of Insecurity, he talks about how the alcoholic's worst thing is doing something that he knows is killing himself, on purpose. And it's like, you're writing about yourself, sir. And but I think even he would think that's funny. It's like you have a person who can tell you what to do, but they're not doing it, but they know they're not doing it because he called it like the irrefutable element of rascality. Like every sage or guru has to have something that grounds them, that makes them part of the earth. Otherwise they just float away, and it's interesting that he died at I think he was like 63 I think he died in like 65 or 66. How old was he? I think he was 58. He's 58 when he died, which then when you look at it, you're like, wow, that's actually young. As I'm 36 now, you're like, that's not that old. And I love how he talks about, he said when he was a kid, he used to think that his grandfather was so wise. Now he's a grandfather. He knows his grandfather was an idiot. And so just that perspective, and it just makes me feel like it's going to be okay.
Yeah, no, I love that idea because I think it's something that I've definitely honed into as I've gotten older, is just like really that idea that like I'm never going to figure it all out. No. I'm never going to understand. I'm always going to be foolish. And
if Alan didn't, what are you even worried about? Like he didn't figure it out. He didn't get it, dude.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's maybe something I appreciate about Alan as well, is the fact that I feel like similar to Socrates in a lot of ways, that he understood that he didn't know.
Yes. Right? I deeply know that I have no idea.
Yeah, I deeply know that I know nothing.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where we all kind of have to stop. Because once you start going into, I figured something out, that literally means you have not figured it out. That is the whole thing about the Tao. The Tao that can be named is not the Tao. Yeah. So once you start pointing at things, that's why I've actually stopped talking about psychedelics a lot. Because I don't want anyone to think that I know anything, because I don't. So I've shared a lot of experiences with people, and there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, but I don't really want to be teaching in that way anymore, which is why I'm not doing as much educational content online in terms of like sharing my philosophies as much. Because I think the moment you go out there and you start saying, this is how it is, and this is what it is, and this is what I learned, it kind of takes away from the sacredness of it all. Cause you're like, you're taking you're removing your cap and the butterflies are flying out. People have to figure these things out for themselves. Like I can't tell you that I did DMT and this is what about God that it doesn't really matter.
Right. Well, and to your point, then people are seeking these substances or they're seeking whatever it is, whether it's entrepreneurship. I feel like that's such a thing currently right now is like everybody's seeking something outside of themselves
Yeah.
rather than like cultivating those questions and cultivating like the curiosity. And it's something I even going back to Socrates a lot. And I often think about my own philosophy professor in college of just being like, it's really giving you the tools, asking you the questions that make you unpack and realize that you don't know, that can be
Yes.
some of the most valuable insights that you
Yes.
actually have.
Yes. It's dangerous when you start to feel like you know. A lot of the
Yeah.
times like Stuart Wilde says, this is another one of my big influences. He's like, you know, you're closest to knowing when you're not out there performing. It's not the guy in the robe, the saffron robes and the incense and the singing in Latin. All that stuff means that you don't know. So just be silent, you know?
Mm.
Act like a fool. You hear these like Chinese proverbs of like the genius who acts like a fool, you know, Lao Tzu and all these guys. It's like, I think that's the way to go. You know, it's like, even in terms of business, this is not something that people want to hear, but like be comfortable with not winning, you know, be okay to stand at the back of the line and say, you go ahead, go in front of me, you know, I'm going to get there anyway, regardless. We don't have to race on ClickFunnels. We don't have to compete. I'm just going where I'm going and I'll see you there or not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's beautiful. I mean, it even raises the question like, right, like what is there to compete with or like why is there competition? Who are you competing with? Yeah.
For what reason? To what end?
Right.
So you also will die. This for why? And in a few generations, no one is going to know. The furthest I can go back, what's the oldest relative you can name of your own?
I have a some amount of greats. Uncle Brian Boru, who was the last king of Ireland or Scotland or something.
That's a good one. Well, you should probably know
like
if it's
united them. Yeah, I know. I gotta know.
That's pretty important information.
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool though. He was like the Vikings supposedly sent like assassins to kill him in his sleep, and he was like stabbed while sleeping, and then woke up and killed them before dying. That's like
hardcore.
The myth for the legend. So it's
These
pretty
guys
dope.
Come from a different cloth, man.
Yeah, very different background.
He was probably like 19 when it happened too.
Yeah, probably. I mean, my grandma always joked like all it took to be a king then was to have 3 pigs at the time. So like, who knows how powerful he was? But yeah, that's my most ancient ancestor that I know.
That's further than I know. I know my great grandmother Agnes Zobel, and I don't know anything before that. So it's like, the whole idea of like leaving a legacy. Even Alexander the Great, it's like fantastic. I watched a reenactment of you on Netflix. Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
So.
Or what was his last name? That's one of my favorite questions when people bring that up.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good question. What was it? I guess he probably had many royal last names because it wasn't like Smith or something. But yeah, who knows? Who cares? You wouldn't even recognize him if you saw him on the street because we don't even know what he looked like, really.
Yeah.
So I think the striving for a legacy part is kind of just there's a lot of vanity behind that. And it's just not necessary,
Yeah, agreed. What, if anything, is your biggest disagreement with Alan Watts?
I've never well, no, that's not true. Well, going back on like his early demise at 58, I would think that there is a value in longevity, right? Like I think sometimes I think certain people come into this world, they burn really hot and they flame out early. I mean, even Tupac, died at 25 and he put out all this work and he burned really hot while he was here. But I think there is something to. I think as much as it doesn't matter, the equal and opposite is true. It does matter. And so through our interactions with the world, we are creating changes in others, whether that's conscious or unconscious. And the more positive changes you can help people to create, the wider your ripple is going to be. So, don't burn up too fast is what I would tell Papa Watts, because he could still be here now and that could be a positive thing for us. A lot of people that are of his caliber don't kill themselves. They get taken out by someone else. So if you're not going to get taken out by someone else, you might as well stick around. because we, I think, could use his wisdom in an age of insecurity. He might already be dead. I mean, if he was 58 in the 60s, he'd be old or dead now, but he could have lasted for longer. And that could have benefited us all. A lot of the guys who are of his caliber get taken out early because people don't like that message. But yeah, I think that, just slow down a little bit. Slow down. There's no rush to get off the earth plane, Stick around a little bit, Socrates.
No, I love that. I'm curious, how do you personally deal with that like dynamic tension between nothing matters and everything matters?
Man, do you read any Nietzsche?
I haven't, no.
I'm not like well versed in his stuff, but I do. It's either Nietzsche or Dostoevsky, who is saying like the ultimate philosophical question is, why not suicide? Why not kill yourself? And I thought it was interesting. Honestly, I think it's a day-to-day thing. For me, I've always had like a very buoyant, upward trajectory personality, so it's natural for me to want to keep progressing. But I think there is a tension between everything and nothing matters. And I go through phases, which is why sometimes I don't want to be on social anymore, which is like I joke with my wife. I'm like, I don't want anybody to view me right now. I don't want anybody to see me. And I think that you just have to be okay with where you're at and how you're feeling about that. It's not, you don't have to make yourself care about something you don't. You don't have to force yourself to feel like it matters if you don't. And I think that even the idea that there should be tension between it matters and it doesn't matter is probably a false dichotomy, because it's this, it's part of, because it doesn't matter, that will remind you why it does, because it does matter will remind you why it doesn't. So it's part of, it's not like either or, it's just this ongoing thing. One implies the other, right? So it's just being, it's just matter. And it's just, the fact that there is something implies that there's also nothing, it's so, don't try too hard to make yourself feel like this is too important. And usually after you've gone through a dark night of the soul or depression or something like that, when you come out on the other side, you'll see why some of the darkness was there, and it will shed light on the things that are important to you. And it's okay to go through phases where you feel helpless or useless or fill in the blankless.
Can you share about like one dark night of the soul moment that you had that led to that healing on the other side?
Yeah, man. I think that just in general, I think that 2022 to even earlier this year was a pretty it was just a low period of there's like energetic lows and there's also depression. And so I think that I went from an energetic low of like, I don't know what I should be doing with myself, to now I'm in depression. And what I learned through that process, well, first of all, I'm not clinically depressed. I'm not sure if I would have been diagnosed as clinically depressed at that time. I can just tell you that what I found interesting about that experience, even while I was in it, I could say, have you ever been like actually depressed before, like real depression? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know like if I would be considered clinically depressed, but definitely through bouts of depression or whatever. Yeah. But yeah,
like what
periods of time.
I thought was interesting was that depression and sadness are obviously not the same thing. I mean, to you that might be obvious, but to someone who's maybe never experienced it, it's not the same thing. It's not like, oh shucks, that didn't work out, or I'm feeling sad today. It's like, it's a lowered vibrational state that's consistent over a period of time that you don't feel like is going to resolve itself naturally. But even when I was in that experience, just because, I built my career on one thing and I didn't know what I was going to do for the next thing. And, I was working on my relationship and things weren't going the way I wanted it, or family things were going on and that was really bothering me. And so like all these things came together. And what I thought was interesting, even that experience, was I was like, wow, this isn't something that you can think your way out of in a way. And that was an interesting learning experience, because I had to feel my way out of it. And I just had to check in with myself. And I had to learn to be okay with having a lower amount of energy. I had to be okay with being in a lower state and not be like, within the entrepreneurship community, especially in the positive mindset, it's like, just go out there and get it. Tackle the day. Lewis Howes, School of Greatness. It's like, that's not, you're faking it, guys. Like, it's okay to say, I'm depressed right now, or I'm not feeling good, or whatever. And I think that it was great for me to understand that contrast, so that I could be more empathetic to others, and so that I could also have a truer gauge of if you're playing on the piano and you only play these keys up here and you never have played those keys on there, you don't really know the totality of your instrument. So the human is an instrument. It has all these different ways that they can sound and play and feel. None of it's wrong. No one would say, oh, a minor chord is wrong. It's just a minor chord. A minor chord also implies a major chord, right? So they go together. You literally can't have positive emotion without negative emotion. They're, the teeth can't bite themselves. The tongue can't lick itself. It's all the same thing. So Alan Watts is the best at making these analogies, by the way, like these whole, the tongue can't lick itself, can it? Your left hand can't give itself a handshake. And so all these things are required for any of it to exist. So that made me feel a little bit better because I started to realize, depression implies lightness, and that didn't necessarily get me out of the depression, but with that perspective, I was able to accept it. And by learning to accept it, I wasn't resisting it because the resistance often makes it worse. So it's like, even in jujitsu, it's like when you're grabbing onto someone, you're attached to them and now they're attached to you. When you're pushing against something, by you pushing against it, it's pushing back on you. And so if you release that tension, it dissipates. And I think that it's one thing to say I'm depressed. It's another thing to say I'm depressed and I shouldn't feel like this. Because now you're layering a judgment on top of a state. The state is natural. The judgment is self-imposed. And then you're trying to unravel this yarn of like, I feel mad at myself that I'm depressed and that's making me anxious. And it's just not useful.
Yeah. I'm mad at myself for being angry. Yeah. I'm mad at myself for that. And then, right. Yeah.
Right.
No,
and
absolutely.
And now I'm feeling anxious because I'm keyed up because I've been mad all week. And it's just like, just allow yourself to feel whatever it is, let it flow through you, and see where it lands. But of course, it's all talking. If you're in a really serious place, it can be a lot harder than that. But that's the truth of it.
Yeah, no, I well said. Well, we are at the end of our time, Daniel. So I have more time if you want.
I got a little bit more time. I got a little bit more time. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I guess I'm just going to respond to what you had said, which is like, I really love that idea. And again, I think I agree. Like this is something that Alan Watts, and I think because he comes from, a Zen tradition in a lot of ways, a lot of these things are very Zen, right? They're these kind of funny ways of looking at life that are very true. And one of the things that I always appreciated about him is like, he really introduced me to the idea of like the enlightenment trap in a sense, not the book, but like that idea of like, once you have this experience of enlightenment or deep presence, right, this attachment forms. You're like, oh, I want to like experience that all the time. Yeah. But as soon as you create that attachment and that desire, you are no longer experiencing that. Like, it's like, or you have a desire to experience desirelessness.
Yes.
And then, but it's like in the acceptance of those things, when you actually experience your desire, you are in fact present, and then that leads to this actual experiencing and happening, which I think is fascinating.
Even if you're like recently, I had like an injury from jujitsu, right, with my leg, and even just the experience of pain. Obviously, there's pain there, but then if you're feeling pain and you're also saying I don't want to feel the pain, that's more painful. So you can experience the stimulus of the pain, and that does hurt. You're interpreting that and your body doesn't like that. But also if you're like, I don't want to feel like that, it adds another layer to it. And so in a similar way to what you're saying, it's desiring to be desirelessness, desiring to have no desire is a desire, even if you get there. It's like, I posted a thing on my IG a couple of days ago with Jim Carrey, and he's like, I've been trying to get back to that moment of enlightenment. And that's just that's the game you're never going to win.
Yeah. No, I agree. Why is philosophy important? I mean, I'm assuming that it is. So if you don't agree that it is, feel free to let me know. But
is it? Do you think it's important? You must think it's important. You're doing a whole podcast on it.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's important. I think it's important because for me, it's accessing the code of which we create reality. And maybe not reality in of itself, like capital R reality, but our perception of reality, right? We get to like, there's Maya, that is this idea, the illusion of the mind that's created. And I think it allows us to shape that Maya in different ways and get closer to that capital R reality in a sense.
It's only philosophy if you agree with it?
No. I think philosophy is fundamentally just like the way that you think about the world or life.
So you could have like a Trump philosophy, and that's a philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a whole worldview built around that.
Yeah, exactly.
A Kamala Harris philosophy. You have a whole worldview built around that.
Yeah.
I think philosophy is important, but I also, again, wouldn't take it too seriously. I think any real philosopher doesn't take it seriously. You know, there's like this story of this group of scholars who are traveling through China, and they're trying to learn about Zen, and they're asking at this university in China, do you know any Zen masters we can talk to learn, you know, if the traditional practice of Zen is still alive and well? And they say, well, we know one person. And they take them to this, you know, secluded monastery, and they see this Zen master, and he's just an enormous guy, really big and fat, kind of like you'd see, like, you know, ever seen like the fat Buddhas? They got the skinny Buddha and the fat Buddha, you know. And he says, they said, you know, Master, we came all this way from America, or UK, I don't know where they were. We came all this way from the West to inquire as to the state of Zen and if it's still viable and active in the world. And the monk listens, and he starts to laugh, and then he starts to tremble, and then every skin fold is just vibrating, and he just has this enormous laughter, this gigantic laughter. You know, is Zen still viable? Is it still around? And he said nothing else, and they left. You know, you know, it's just like even the question itself shows that you don't understand what we're looking at. But also, he was showing just through that response, it doesn't matter, and why are you asking me? And yes, it doesn't matter, and that's the wrong question.
Yeah.
So I think philosophy is important, but I wouldn't put too much stock in it because it's man-made, you know?
Yeah, beautiful. What do I want to ask you next? What is a challenging experience from your past that in hindsight you're grateful you had?
My grandmother, she was like the original entrepreneur in our family, one of them. And she, I mean, at least on that side. And she had a like this shop that we would open up every weekend. And man, I hated helping to do that. I hated that. Like I hated having to, you know, your parents make you do something. You have a farm, and they're like, go milk the cows, and, you know, go, I don't know, you do on a farm, get some hay or whatever.
Yeah.
go get some well water. And like, no kid likes that. But what I've learned through, I think it's important for children to have, to learn discipline through chores, which, you know, my kids are not going to like this, I'm sure, as they pop up. But I think that's important because it gives you a certain amount of, the discipline allows you to solve problems for yourself. It allows you to make decisions for yourself, see how the outcome affects you, and to not have to always ask someone what to do next. And having to like run the shop and being able to interact with customers as an adult, you know, selling things and working through problems, and like all these different things taught me a lot of self-reliance, and they made it easier for me to, I think, more confident to put myself out there as I got older, which is maybe something I took for granted at that time because not everyone was getting that experience. I think that even just with business itself, it can be very nerve-wracking to ask people to buy things, to put yourself out there, to market yourself, to just be the focus of attention. And I think that experience helped me to break through that early, where I didn't even realize it was a thing.
Beautiful. So like really developing like that self-discipline at a very, very young age, where it became a part of your life. It didn't have to be something you learned later on in life.
And also you don't have to like something for it to be good for you, you know, but of course kids are not going to want to hear that. That's only something that you can value in hindsight, but it doesn't have to, even just with healing, you know. So we're working on this book with Brett Jones, The Healing Way. And one of the points that he makes in the book is that healing doesn't always feel good. So, you know, obviously, like, consult your physician and don't do anything dangerous. Like, this is a podcast disclaimer, but ultimately, if you're healing a broken bone, the whole time, it's not gonna be like, now that the bone is broken, but now that it's healing, every day it feels a little bit better. That's not necessarily the case. It might just hurt the whole time through the healing. And then even afterwards, it might still hurt a little bit. And that might that might go on for a while. But if you always point your ship in the direction of things that don't hurt, that feel good, you'll oftentimes end up in a place where you don't want to be, that ultimately hurts more than if you would have gone through some of the painful experiences in order to actually correct either an emotional problem or a spiritual thing you're working through or physical pain. And I've seen individuals, even in my family, like, like let's say that you're going through a health crisis, and in order to resolve the health crisis, it's going to resolve you going to physical therapy and doctors and changing your lifestyle. All that can be painful, but there's that pain and there's the pain of doing nothing and seeing it deteriorate. So they're both painful, and the only but the pain of letting it deteriorate is a slow thing where it happens over time, and you don't realize that you're in a worse position until it's become quite bad. Whereas you push through the pain of positive growth and it's still going to hurt, but there's a better result on the other side. So I think sometimes we shy away from pain so much, partially because of the way that our environment is now. I mean, even thinking about the fact that we have air conditioning. I don't even want to be in a room where the temperature isn't to my liking. And so we're always looking for different levels of comfort. And I think that can backfire on us when there are options in our life or there are times in our life where no option is comfortable, but there's clearly an option that's better for us. So.
Is there a particular pain, I want to say, that you currently seek or are having that relationship with in a different or new or profound way?
Well, I'm definitely stretching myself right now. I mean, even just in terms of business, I'm playing the Earth game right now. So I think sometimes you can get spacey where you're like, man, it doesn't matter, fucking all gonna die, cosmos, it's all the universe, DMT, fucking Kundalini. You can play that game, but ultimately right now I'm playing capitalism game. I'm playing Earth game. I'm playing capitalism. I know that I'm playing it. Even the people who say, I don't subscribe to capitalism. What that usually means is you're playing it just not as successfully as someone else. We're all playing the capitalism game. If you live in a place where that has a rent or a mortgage and you're paying your bills and you're doing something, you're playing the game. So I think sometimes the resistance to that makes it seem hard or makes you resentful of the environment that we're in. But I'm willingly accepting it. I'm saying I'm playing the capitalism game hard right now. I'm accepting that it's going to require me to even today, I was doing some biz dev stuff. And one of the annoying things I'm doing right now, which is painful, is the company that I've been building for the past year is an independent publishing company, publishing books, right? And part of my responsibility is bringing in customers for this, not just making sure the product gets done, but also bringing in the consistent flow of new people. Now, I have this a text message list, an SMS list of about 15,000 names from the past 10 years, names and phone numbers. And for a few different reasons, I'm not using my automated text system because it doesn't even matter why not. Technically, I can't do it right now. It doesn't matter why not.
Sure.
But so I have this list of people, and every day for 3 hours in the morning, I'm knocking off as many of these 15,000 names as I can, literally just texting them and saying, hey, I just opened up a publishing company. Do you know anyone who wants to publish a book? I'm just doing it over and over and over and over. And guess what? There's nobody that can really do it for me. A VA can't do it because in this instance, it has to be me. It just has to be me right now. It can't be automated right now. And it has to get done. So I'm backed in this corner. I'm choosing to do it, but I'm in this corner where it's if you want to move the business forward, the math I've done is, and again, it's all sales math. It's okay, you have 15,000 phone numbers. Of those 15,000 phone numbers, if you get a 1% response rate, that would be 150. That would be 150. So a 3% response rate, people responding, would be 500 people. Of those 500 people that respond, if 10% of those people are interested or a good fit, that's 50 phone calls you're setting up. Of those 50 phone calls you're setting up, if you're closing, let's say I suck and I'm closing 20%, now I'm closing 10. If the average ticket price of getting a book made is $50,000, that's a $500,000, potential gross, right? But to get to that, I have to go through 15,000 names. It's not necessarily going to happen just like that. And then I start to do the math. I'm okay, well, it's taking me 3 hours a day, and that will probably I calculated it would take me 150 hours basically to get through all those names, 120 to 150 hours. So I'm doing the math on it. I'm okay, this is netting me about maybe $1,000 an hour, but that's all retroactively I would get paid. So in the moment that I'm doing it, I'm not getting paid. I'm only doing it because I know it's long term. That's what you do when you're playing the capitalism game. It's not like, well, I hope I just manifest it, or the right person will come along, or it's all good. Like, no, we're playing numbers. This is how it works. So sit down for 3 hours and go type. And guess what? You can't really multitask with it. It's literally just click, 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 click. So that's a pain that I'm becoming acquainted with. I have been sharpening that muscle, or sharpening that saw, strengthening that muscle.
Beautiful. Why did you choose to open up a publishing company at this point in your journey?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, like it's so obvious, and it's also so it's just hilarious to me because it's only obvious once you're doing something like this. But for me, writing was the thing that got me to this point. That's the one core skill that I've always had that has allowed me to make different transitions, whether it's like copywriting is a form of writing, authoring a book is a different type of writing. I've done a lot of different types of, like, using the written word to get to mold the world into my way. And then along the way, I've gotten all this business experience as well. And then along the way, I've produced 3 different books myself, traditionally through an independent publisher and self-published. So 3 different books through 3 different ways. I've gained all these skills, and the net of it is, without being as humble as possible, I'm a certified pro at this. Like, I'm very, very good at producing very high quality, professionally done books, making sure that they're just as high quality as you'd find on a bookstore shelf. I'm also a stickler for having impeccably well written stuff, and I'm great at marketing, and I have all these relationships. And so it took me however long it's been, 7 or 8 years to gain these skills, and then enough time away from doing my other stuff to step back and say, oh, this is how it all fits together. Part of me taking a year off of social media was to get some space and some quiet to say, well, how do all my skills fit together? Like, I can keep doing coaching and I can do all these things that are using 1 or 2 of my skills, but how can I combine them all? And then not only that, but like, what's sustainable for me? I'd rather work with fewer people at a higher price point than a lot of people at a lower price point. And also, what's going to be relevant for me in 10 years? What's something I can turn into a real asset? And then I also look at just the competitive space. And I don't know, Scribe, right? Mm-hmm. So Scribe had a massive failure. And in that failure, I was able to do a lot of investigation about their business model. And I saw a lot of things. And I also am a Scribe client. One of my books I did through Scribe. And there were a lot of things about that experience I didn't like. And I'm like, oh, I can do this better. And because I published traditionally through Scribe and I self-publish, I know how to fucking publish. So I know this is what I would do differently. And then I look at some of the mistakes they made. I'm like, oh, and I'm not saying it was easy. And I'm not saying that I would have made different choices because they were working through things like investor fraud. So that's not something a mistake that I would make. So, but I can't say that I wouldn't make any mistakes building the business. But I know that if I look at their last big year, I think was 2022, and they made 21 mil, and most of that money was from one-time only clients. And I know because I'm a client. They never asked me if I wanted to do another book with them. They never asked me if I needed additional support after. They never invited me to an event for authors. Like, they never did anything. They never tried to get me onto a recurring anything. So I'm like, for your business model, you have to be getting in a lot of authors to be able to sustain this. And I always remember what Dan Kennedy said. He said, we don't make customers to get sales. We make sales to get customers. So they never really retained me as a customer, but I paid them like 50 G's. And I'm like, oh, even if I was able to only get a third, a tenth, a fourth of what they got, but I could retain those customers with a high level of service and a lot of integrity, that's a multi-million-dollar business, and I know all the ins and outs of it. I mean, I've been an editor at a major newspaper. I've had all these different experiences where I know the industry. So I'm like, in business, information asymmetry is one of the biggest advantages. It's actually the advantage. And a lot of people can look at what they've done and say, that's interesting, but I actually know how it works. So having all that experience in industry knowledge, plus having done it successfully myself, maybe have a lot of confidence that I could at least be successful on a small scale. And I'll continue to work it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I loved what you said too about like bringing all of these different parts of yourself sort of together for this next team that broader picture. Cause I think I mentioned earlier, right, you've gone through these kind of different 3-year changes from being an actor to, a copywriter to starting like some other business here. I think you did a like education for SATs or something like that too at one point, right? So you've had all of these different pieces. And I think one of the things that I think I hear a lot right now in the kind of entrepreneurial space is like pick one thing and like stick with it and don't change and da da da. And like there's like in the same way that there's like truth to nothing matters and everything matters, I feel like there's truth to like try a bunch of things and to stick with something. And it's like, because in the path that you chose, even choosing how you published your book in different ways taught you so much to have a very specific niche understanding and varied skill set that probably very, very few, if anyone else, has at all.
Very few. You'd have to have done that. You'd have to have had those 3 books in 3 different ways. I can speak to that, so, and it's not a brag. It's just, well, that took about 15 years. So
yeah,
I had to have the confidence, and I'm like, have to remind myself of this, but have the confidence that if anybody knows how to do this, you would have a good shot at it. It's not easy, but your experiences are your resume. And so that gave me the confidence, and yeah, it's been going really well.
Beautiful, man. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I have one final question for you, which is, what's one question that you would have for the audience? It can be anything that you'd want it to be. If you want to have them think about something in a different way, or you have an ask of them, but what would that question be?
My question would be, why do you want it? Whatever it is that you want so badly, and we all have things that we wake up in the middle of the night or we wake up the first thing in the morning thinking about, examine why you want that. And it doesn't mean that that's a bad reason. And if you examine that reason and it still seems to ring true, then carry on, good sir or ma'am. But if you examine that enough, it might get you a little bit closer to finding that truth within you, which is the authority. Because I think sometimes we create like these, like let's say you create a vision board for yourself, right? And then you have this vision board up. But if you never check in and say, do I actually still want these things? Sometimes you're headed in the wrong direction, or you're just not being conscious enough about the fact that you're changing. And people, it's okay to change, and so question your own beliefs and your own desires as frequently as you can, because you should not be the one that's stopping you from growing.
Beautiful. And then Daniel, anywhere you want to send anybody, social media is your business, etc.
I mean, you can, IG is at Daniel DiPiazza. I'm sure it will be in the show notes. DanielDiPiazza.com. You can learn about what I'm doing. My blog's on there, all my links, publishing stuff. It's all on there.
Awesome. Daniel, well, this is a lovely conversation. Appreciate your time, and we'll do it again soon.
Thank you, Cam.